Welcome to Q&A. I'm Marcia Boyles, and I'm just delighted today to introduce my guest. John Carle, I was so taken by your presentation that you did several months ago at the players meeting, talking about your background and experience, and the group was absolutely mesmerized by everything you had to say. So today, you and I have talked about this a little bit, and you are going to kind of condense the presentation and kind of go through again and tell us what have you been doing since you were born.
And make it mesmerizing.
Make it mesmerizing, too. No, I bet you've never had an offer quite like that.
Well, it's fascinating. Where would you like to start?
Well, let's start with your childhood and how you happened to get interested in theater.
Well, it's probably a combination of things. When I was in mid-school, late elementary, televisions came into the household, and between television and school plays, which I was enticed to be in and really enjoyed, I became very interested in song and dance men on television, since so much of the television was captured by variety shows.
I was going to say, Ed Sullivan shows and things. Now, where did you grow up, John?
I grew up in the Bronx.
In the Bronx.
Yes.
Okay.
45 minutes from Broadway.
Oh, how fortuitous.
Right.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Those early variety shows, had lots of song and dance, lots of everything, didn't it? Yeah.
So I became fascinated with the dance routines in particular. And just about that time, I guess I was entering the teenage years, would have been, by the time I got to those years, I was very interested in dancing, was learning ballroom dancing and just other things on my own. And I had been taking dance lessons for a few years, which was my first introduction to the world of Broadway and actually the actual street itself. When I went to take my first lessons, they were in a dance studio up a flight, at least one flight of stairs, maybe two, over stores or restaurants on Broadway. So that was my first introduction. And of course, television with all the dance routines and all the comedians. Comedians also fascinated me. Why? Well, because they were probably at the receiving end of a lot of love and affection, attention, and I craved that as a kid.
And it certainly was acting.
Oh, yes.
When I think of those early comedian sketches.
Yes, yes.
Sid Caesar and et cetera.
Imogene Coca.
Imogene Coca.
Yes. And they all fascinated me, and I was just enamored with their style of life and the way they could just go back and forth without seeming to rehearse anything. It just fascinated me.
All seemed to flow, didn't it, naturally?
Yes. So that's how it started.
Okay. Now, did you talk to your parents about this? In your family, did you have any actors, dancers, comedians?
No. My mom and dad both sang quite well, and that was about it. They never voiced any opinion about my intrigue with the dancing world and the type of dancing. And through going to take ballet lessons, which is what I started with, I eventually branched out into other forms of dance, not tap. I did try tap dancing a couple of times, but I didn't like it for whatever reason. I can't remember. But I did like the Broadway style of dancing, the contemporary dance and jazz and all of that. That's what I really was interested in. So I practiced and went to lessons and kept getting cast in little shows here and there at church or in school, and I sought out every opportunity I could to participate in either music or dance or acting.
Okay.
So acting, though, was the last of the callings. Dance was first, and singing was second, and then acting came later.
All right. All right. Well, that's a logical threesome, certainly
Yeah.
for Broadway. Okay, so we got you up through your teenage years, and then what happened?
Well, there's one interesting story that I'd like to include, and that is in high school, I was in the All-City Chorus. And that would lead, and that was at Julia Richmond High School, which was down in Manhattan on the east side, and just a short walk, really, from Broadway. For a teenager, it was a short walk. Long blocks, but short walk. And I was over on Broadway, just poking around. I'd gone to a library in the vicinity and gotten out some records to take home and play. And I was around 45th Street and Broadway and decided, I'd go down one of those streets by Schubert Alley, 44th or 45th, because there were theaters and they had their projections, whatever you call that, out, the marquee. And I said, ooh, a theater, so I had to go and look at that. And on the way back to Broadway, having looked at the theater and whatever was playing at the time, probably something like the original South Pacific.
Right, Mary Martin.
Yeah. And coming back towards Broadway, there was a guy was outside a stairwell, and he said, "Come on, we're having auditions for a show. Go on up and audition." So I was very shy, and I didn't trust this situation at all. And I sort of went by, and he said, "Come on, you're the right age in that. There are a lot of people up there. Go on up and audition. You just have to dance a little and sing." Of course, he said the magic words.
Exactly.
Dance and sing. And so up I went.
Having no idea what you were going to be auditioning for.
No. It ended up, it was Broadway auditions for the musical Bye Bye Birdie.
Really?
So I went up and, of course, auditioned with 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 other people, young men and women, and we were all shown a routine to do and taught a song. So we had to sing. Luckily, we did the dance first, so my heart would stop beating ferociously. And then we were asked to sing this ditty we had learned. I don't even remember what it was. I was probably blind with fear by then, and did that. And thank you very much. Do you have a picture and a resume? I didn't even know what he was talking about, you know. No, I don't. Are you a member of Actors Equity? No. Again, I had no idea what that was.
What this was about.
So I left. And that night, there was a phone call. And my mother or father answered the phone and said, you know, JC, which is what they called me, JC, it's for you. So I answered the phone, and it was that stage manager who was enticed me to go up the stairs and audition in the first place. And he said, "This is so-and-so from the audition this afternoon." And I said, "Oh, yeah." And he said, "Well, we'd like you to come back for a callback and audition again." And so I was very intrigued by that, and you know, was very excited. So
imagine.
Naturally, I told my family.
And you were what, like about 16, something like that?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I was somewhere between 14 and 16, and
very young.
yeah, and I probably could figure it out by when the show went on Broadway, and then go back maybe a year. And so now this is the first time my parents have heard about this adventure of mine.
So you had not told them about this?
No, of course not. I mean, why? So now I had to confess all, because this would mean going down tomorrow or whenever the audition was set up for. And it also would mean, I can't remember the time of year it was. I think it might have been June. School may have already been out.
Okay, I was going to ask you about that.
I just don't have any recollection of that entering the conversation. And I told my mom and dad about it, and of course they just squashed that
did they?
immediately. So I never did go back.
Oh,
I just didn't show up.
Oh, John. I mean, think of Bye Bye Birdie. That's incredible.
It would have been fun.
Gosh.
And then it would have been touring for a while because they would do the initial preparation for the show out of New York City. You know, they would
Did they use kids still in school?
Yeah.
And how did they?
They have tutors.
They have tutors.
Yeah.
Okay. So that might have been doable.
It might have been, especially when they're out on the road. You'd have to have a tutor to make up for the months of work that you would be losing.
When you look back on that incident, does it make you a little annoyed that your folks put the kibosh on it?
Not really.
Okay.
I was really too young and naive and inexperienced as to the world.
So you would not have been ready, really?
No, I would not have been.
Okay.
And that's supposing I would have gotten the job.
Right,
It would have been in
exactly.
the chorus,
Exactly.
you know.
But certainly, your very first audition to be asked back, I think that's that's a big deal.
Yeah. So that's what encouraged me.
I can imagine that it would.
And so in the back of my mind from then on, I really wanted to be a dancer.
And now
That's
you
what I
knew
was
what
doing.
auditions looked like.
I did. I did.
So you became an old pro.
Right.
Okay, overnight.
And then I went on to school and college and got as my father said, my meal ticket.
Meal ticket.
That's what he called it.
Right. You got a teaching degree, didn't you?
Yes, in music.
In music.
Yes. So I taught for 4 years in New Jersey.
High school?
No, it was elementary, K through 8. So I had 425 students a week from K up to 8.
That must have been a bit of a challenge.
It was, since I was not much older than they were, it was.
Right.
And of course, in those days, they left students back. So some of them were really, I was 21, and a couple of the kids were 18.
Okay.
And of course, taller than me. Where's the teacher? Here I am. Which actually happened.
So you did that for 4 years?
4 years. And then all through that time, I studied and was in various shows in New Jersey, mainly shows as a part of fundraisers, like for hospitals and other charities.
Amateur.
Yeah, and they would bring in, it was amazing. I remember the production that was called Carle Productions, which is a big food conglomerate company in the Midwest. And they had this program where they would send in a choreographer, director, an accompanist, and those 3 people would put together, and they'd provide all the costumes, all of the scripts,
Backdrops.
everything, and then, you know, for a price to the sponsoring organization, and then the sponsoring organization would make sure there was enough actors and dancers, etc. The show would be done, money would be made, and Carle would be paid, or maybe they had to be paid up front, who knows. And then any profits over and beyond that.
But it must have been a pretty professional production in that case.
Yeah, so it was a good experience for me.
Oh, I can imagine it would be.
Yeah, so that was fun.
Excellent.
And of course, I continued to study singing, acting, and dancing. By then, I was doing more acting because I had had stage experience in college doing real plays, not, you know, the cat and the mouse stuff from elementary school. So I combined it, and I discovered and was encouraged in the acting field more so than the dancing. I moved well, so that was fine. That's great. You know, if you're going to get a part in a show that was a musical, you had to move well.
And you're smart. You would remember the lines.
Yeah, I remember the lines. I'm laughing because right now I'm being challenged with the play we're going to be doing here in November. The Butler did it, and I have 331 lines to memorize.
Do you? Are you the
Yes.
butler?
I'm the butler.
That's what I thought.
And I did it.
And John, you're, oh, now, don't tell. I suspect that is really quite a chapter, 331
Yeah,
lines.
it's a
I
lot.
had no idea it was that many.
It's a lot.
Okay. Well, see, you've had lots of practice for memorizing.
Yes.
Goes way back.
Yeah.
All right, so we've gotten you through college. You have taught for 4 years in New Jersey, and now what?
Well, now, finally, after about 4 years, 2 of which I actually lived in New York, in Manhattan, in the last 2 of those 4 years, and I continued, studying and honing my skills in the city with the pros. I mean, people who were working in the theater, not people who just taught for a living.
Right.
These people did both.
These were folks with connections.
Yes, yeah. And the 2 most famous of that group would be Herbert Berghoff of the Herbert Berghoff Theater and Studio and School, which was on Bank Street in New York. And I studied there with Berghoff a bit before he stopped teaching Uta Hagen, who was a very famous actress of that period. In fact, she was the first one who played the female lead in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, plus other things. And I studied with Charles Nelson Riley, who was a big, young
We all remember
young
that
man,
name.
in the musical theater, and I also went for a while to the Lee Strasberg studio and studied there. So that all led to auditioning. Now you have to really take all this and do something with it. In the meanwhile, I was working, of course. And what do you do as a young actor in New York? You wait on tables.
Okay. Did you? So you paid your dues there.
I paid my dues, and I loved it. I really did.
You loved waiting on tables?
I did.
Did you?
I really did.
You would do it with a flair.
Well, I had fun with it, especially if the people were annoying.
Oh, I see. Oh, John.
That little devilish part of me would come out.
I could see it. Yeah.
Is your coffee too hot? Would you like me to
Cool it down.
Cool it down for you? And then the other interesting part of that whole saga of that era was I just would audition for anything that came up that I thought suited me and my size and my personality, et cetera. And I was a character actor. I was never, a leading man or young, dashing boyfriend person. I was always the character actor. So I would read it and say, oh, that's a part I could do. And I'd go and audition. Of course, I wasn't a member of the union, which played out in various ways. One of the first auditions I did was for Equity Library Theater, which is a professional showcase for equity performers, people who are members of the Actors Union, who go and they volunteer their time to be in this play, and theater directors and producers and people in television movies come to these to see the young talent that's out there. And other people, other actors would also participate because they didn't have a job at the time. So they would go and say, I'm still here, and I'm still young and vital and ready to work. And so I would go to these auditions and get cast. But no one thought to ask me if I was a member of Equity or not, of the union. And eventually I'd be found out. And with that Equity Library Theater show, they found out I was not a member of Actors Equity. But by then I had been in rehearsal, and I was sort of integrated in the cast, and it would mean recasting my part. I was an accompanist, a pianist, and coach, and all that in the play. And they finally said, well, we'll talk to Actors Equity, and Actors Equity gave them a dispensation.
Now, John, tell me about Actors Equity. Do you have to be asked to join that group?
No, you have to have a contract.
You have to have, all right.
A contract to be a performer in
I
a
see.
show.
That is the
Yes.
criterion.
And then you go to Actors Equity with your signed contract
I see.
and pay your
Pay your dues.
$1,000 or whatever it is, and join.
But if you don't have a contract, and you had not had any written contracts,
No.
does the contract imply something long-term? Is that what
For the run of the show.
Okay.
It's all based on sales. And I don't mean ticket sales. I mean, what is your selling point to the audience? Do they like you? Do they come to see the show because the part you're doing is memorable? How is it going over with the theater folks? How's it going over with the audience? So it's all weighted towards the producer. So the producer can fire you because you're not doing the job that they expected you to do. So I was not a member of Actors Equity at that point, but you can't become a member unless you have a contract. But you can't audition unless you're a member.
Right.
So you have to be a little brave and just go. And
All right.
I think they're probably much more careful these days than they were.
They might have checked.
They would probably check my card.
John, do I remember when you made the presentation to the players that you became really a specialist, if that's the proper word, I'm not sure that it is, in Gilbert and Sullivan?
Yes, I did. When I was in college, they were mounting a production of HMS Pinafore. And I remember in high school we sang one chorus from the Gilbert and Sullivan repertoire, and I just loved it. It was just an
It's certainly very
eye-opener to me.
whimsical, and I can see that it would appeal
And
to
it
your
was
sense
big,
of humor.
and it had, a female chorus up above, and the men were singing down below, rump, rump, sort of like Battle Hymn of the Republic type feeling. And so I said, I've always liked Gilbert and Sullivan from one song.
Right.
So I went and auditioned for it, and I got the lead of
Now,
Sir
where
Joseph
was
Harder.
that? Where was that?
At Grove City College in Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania. So I did that role, had a wonderful time doing it. And that was really my first singing, dancing, acting role, or I should say acting, singing, dancing role. And I won the Best Actor of the Year award for that portrayal. So when I was in New York and after teaching and all of that, in Backstage, which is a newspaper for theater folk that have all the auditions listed that are going on, I noticed there was an audition for a professional equity production company of Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, and it was called the American Savoyards. And so I took myself over to the Provincetown Playhouse, which was just below NYU in Manhattan, and auditioned and got a call back. And then it was discovered I wasn't a member of Actors Equity again. And so for that reason alone, Dorothy Radler would not give me the roles, because what it meant would have been learning 5 operettas, one a week for 5 weeks. But you rehearse and practice the first operetta, and then you start the second one, but that first one you open while you're rehearsing the second one. So they just kept opening until 5 weeks of
Wow, that sounds grueling.
it was. And so what she did was she let me be the understudy to the comic lead, doing roles such as Coco in The Mikado and Sir Joseph Porter in Pinafore, which I already knew from
So
college.
you actually had to learn more roles because you were the
Yeah.
understudy.
Right, so I had to learn all 5 roles
Wow.
and all the choruses because I was in the chorus. So did that, and then the following year, at the end of that first season, and the season went from, I would say, June to May, with an out-of-town tryout, and the tryouts at that period were up in East Haddam, Connecticut, at the Opera House in East Haddam. So we played up there for a month to paying audiences, and then brought that show to New York and opened it.
So it was in New York for 10 or 11 months and...
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
with some breaks in there. And
Was the pay fairly decent?
I guess it was for that period of time, but it wasn't Broadway standard, so it was below Broadway, which is why she kept as many of the lowly folk in the chorus off equity. But the last performance of the last day, the night before, we were given contracts if we wanted them. And we could go that next day. There was a one-day window because we were closing that night, and pay our dues and become members of Equity.
Oh, all right.
So I did. I became a member of Equity. And then a few weeks later, or a month, maybe a month later, she had auditions again for the next season. So I went and auditioned again and became the comedian in my own right,
Yes.
not the understudy. And 3 of the 5 shows that we did, I already knew from the season before. So I only had to learn 2. So it all worked out for the best, because I don't know if I would have been able to have learned the staging and all of the dialogue and music to 5 shows,
Oh, gosh.
although I knew 1.
Now, so this was New York-based and stayed in New York mostly.
Yeah,
And don't I remember you did then touring?
I did a lot of touring after that.
Was that the same company or was it a different one?
No. When she closed permanently and moved to St. Croix,
St. Croix.
yes, where she started a School of the Arts down there, which I visited as a guest artist a number of times. The woman who was doing the contralto parts, who would be my foil in most of the operettas, there's, the little comedian and the big
Right.
domineering female character, the contralto. And she and I started a duo. We built our own costumes, picked out selections from all the operettas, weaved them together with a little pattern.
With a little dialogue and,
Yeah. And toured with that under Columbia artists for a few years. That got to be old hat pretty quickly. And we,
For you or the audience?
No, for us. It was just very tiring.
To do the same thing night after night?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And especially if the bookings were really tight and we had to be out on the road.
Yeah.
And we drove ourselves, so that got to be really rough, especially since everyone wanted performers to come in the winter when they were bored and their farms were not working.
Oh, all right.
know.
So these were very rural areas.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
The Midwest, mainly. It was fascinating.
With great distances between towns.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And terrible weather.
Yes. And those
Icy.
cornfields would get to be a bit of a bore.
Yeah.
I can only imagine.
But some of those places I've never seen without snow. So it would be sort of interesting to go back.
Well, they're still just as flat.
Yeah. So then
How many
after
years
that,
did you do that?
Well, I think that would have been for that duo that toured. It would have been 2 or 3 years, and then I started to get an idea that wouldn't it be fun to add a soprano and tenor to this, and make it a quartet. So we did that. And there were 2 people we had worked with before, and we integrated them, expanded the rep, and so it wasn't as difficult on us, you know, the contralto and the comedian. And we did that for maybe 3 years. And at that point, the tenor was working for another group, and he recommended me to come in and take the tenor parts in that. And that was a quintet. And that toured for about 5 years.
And that was also Gilbert and Sullivan.
So I sort of backed into that area and never got out of it, really.
So in total, how many years did you do Gilbert and Sullivan?
35.
35. Oh my gosh, John.
And I ended up doing a lot of directing of the same shows.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Now, were all 35 or most of the 35 then touring?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, you know, I would love to end the show by asking you to sing a song, but I know you won't.
No.
Because we asked you before at the players' meeting, and you declined gracefully, but
I'd have to work up to that.
I see. Well, John, maybe that will be the next show.
Okay.
Absolutely. Listen, I see that our time is coming to an end here. You retired when?
Well, the last time I performed professionally would have been 1990. And luckily I did one of my favorite roles, which the New York Times, when I was in New York with the American Savoyards, picked out as my best role. And I performed the Lord Chancellor in Iolanthe, which has that wonderful Nightmare song in it.
The New York Times said, well, I think that speaks volumes about
So
your
that would have been
reputation.
1990. And then from 1990
Did you know
to
that was
95. No, I had no idea.
It was your last
It just
performance.
happened.
Okay. 1990 to 95.
I directed.
Oh, you directed. So you were in the business till 95.
Till 95. And then I came here in retirement.
When did you come? You didn't come to Green Spring in 95.
No.
When did you come to Green Spring? You've been here about 7 years?
Yeah, 8 years,
8
actually.
years.
So 8 years ago, 2008.
Well, John, you contribute so much here at Green Spring.
Well, I'm having fun.
You know, that is the truth, and when a place like this can use your talents to this degree, you're providing fun for other folks as well. But I know you are having fun doing it.
Yes, I am.
The players would simply not be the same without you. You have taken, I think, every possible role. I mean, you've directed, I think you've produced. I know you've acted.
I've never produced.
Haven't produced,
No.
but you certainly have been directing.
Directing, yeah. Stage managing.
Stage managing.
Twice.
Yeah, absolutely. You have just been
And acting.
and also helping with the play selection. You've also done some editing
Yeah.
of the plays.
Yes.
So you. Oh,
Yes.
that's right. Sorry, that's right. That's a secret.
I decided to try acting again because in one show, the friar, Romeo and Juliet, the friar was ill. So I had to go on stage at the last minute and do like 3 performances. And someone came up who was on staff here then and came up to me and he said, "Forget all that directing, you belong on stage."
Okay, and you found it fun too.
So I said, you know, I really enjoyed that.
Okay.
So that would have been 2008, 2009. So it had been 9 years plus 5. 14 years after my retirement from the stage, I went back on.
Well, I think one of your most memorable roles was you in Knickers. Now, which play was that?
I think that was the unexpected guest.
It was, and you were absolutely adorable in your knickers. You really did make quite a scene. Oh gosh. Well,
Okay.
John, I can't tell you how much fun this has been to do, and
Well, it's always fun to talk about oneself.
well, of course it is, and you do it very well, and your story is so interesting. So we
thank
just
you.
feel very privileged to have you here.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks for coming today. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next month.